art teacher at Halethorpe Elementary School. Welcome to my sock monkey demonstration video. Today we'll be making this sock monkey. As you can see, there are lots of options with how to make monkeys. We're going to keep it simple and we're going to have fun. Let's get started. These are the materials you'll need to make your sock monkey. You need 2 socks and coordinating yarn or contrasting yarn, fabric scissors, tapestry needle, which has a big eye and a blunt tip, buttons for the monkey's eyes, regular needle and thread or embroidery floss for sewing the eyes on, and polyfiber fill for stuffing your monkey. So the first sock that we cut will become the body and legs of the sock monkey. So first we pick up the sock and change the fold of it. Socks traditionally come with a side view like this, and you want to change that to flatten it the opposite way. And we will stop the cutting by the time we get to the heel, so we want to look at the back or the bottom of the sock. Now, the way this came from the factory with the fold winds up giving us a cutting line here right at the center. Some people like to measure and mark their cutting line. That would be your choice. I think it's fun when the monkeys are how they are. So we'll just try to get the center cut of the legs. You're cutting through all the layers up to the heel and stop there. That gives us 2 legs, and here's your monkey's butt and his back. And now the second sock, we're going to cut the tail. The tail will be the entire length of the sock here. And I'll stop when I get to the toe. I like to use the toe of the sock for the muzzle of the monkey, so I'll go ahead and cut that off. And this one, I'll cut it 1 layer at a time so that I can be sure that I'm getting the entire toe piece off. Because you'll find that the line of the toe seam gives you a smile on your monkey later. So that's the tail. This remaining part here, we're going to cut straight across. And this remaining piece of sock is your 2 arms. So you'll need to cut that down the center. And then we'll roll that together to make 1 arm, and roll that together to make the second arm. Now on this monkey, I plan to leave square toes and hands. So I will not be trimming this. You'll see on the other monkey I will round the toes. So we have 2 arms, a tail, the muzzle, and we need the ears. And the ears you can get, it's kind of like cutting the letter D. So you cut 1 and then you say, well, gee, I want my second one to be exactly the same. So you can lay it on top and hold it or pin it. And cut around to get that second ear. And then we have a scrap that we set aside. And you have your 2 ears. So looking at it, we would flip it over. This will be the front, There's going to be the ears. There's about where that'll go. These will be here. And you're looking. So to start sewing your monkey, we're going to need a length of the yarn that you've selected. And you want to take a nice big length once and twice. So big length, like opening your arms for a hug, that kind of a length. And please, friends, always pull your yarn from the center of your skein. That keeps things in order. To successfully thread my needle, I try to pinch the end of the yarn and lay the eye of the needle right on the end of the yarn, and as I release that little pinch, it forces the yarn into the eye of the needle, and then I can pull the yarn through the needle. And for now, I'll set aside my arms and my ears and the mouth and the tail, and I'm going to start with sewing at the feet. I like to bury my thread inside the monkey, so I put a couple of inches of yarn inside the foot and then fold it shut. And my first stitch, I like to do this around maneuver that will cause a loop to form, that when I'm pulling that through, the loop ties a little knot. You want your stitches to be roughly equal distance apart as you sew your monkey. And the stitch that you're seeing right now on this monkey is a blanket stitch. And what it does is it lays the yarn across the end where the two seams meet. So if you notice, when I release that stitch, the yarn is laying like a big loop here. And as I take my next stitch, I'm coming out in that loop space so that when I pull the yarn through, it makes these nice blanket stitch that lands on the edge. It just gives a nice finished look to your monkey. As you're sewing, you want to make sure the edges, the two layers of your sock are staying together. You'll be so sad if you sew 3 inches up the leg and find that you are not sewing your two layers together. So you always want to keep track. Am I getting both layers in? Are my stitches in from the edge far enough? Not too far, but far enough to get a good stitch. So when this starts happening, the tail that I had doubled my thread is getting caught. So I'm going to come over to, I'm pulling the needle so that that second tail is away from my work a little bit. If you notice, this hand is bracing the work. It acts as like a clamp and a support. And then I'm again checking, do I have both layers of sock meeting each other evenly right here as I take my next stitch. This pair of socks is curling, so each sock is different. These ones tend to be curling. It's just the way that they're woven together. So I'm noticing that I'm having to keep checking it that they're lined up. It's always good to keep checking though, whether your socks are curling or not. Now I like to stuff as I go, so that's 3 or 4 inches is sewn. Now I'm going to pause here, make sure the leg is open, and get some stuffing. take a small portion of stuffing, put it at the entry point there, stuff it in with your thumbs, and push it all the way to the toe, and get some more stuffing. So I push that wad in to meet the other portion and mush it around a little to try to even it up. Alright, so I got the leg stuffed up to where I'm stitching, and I don't want the cotton hanging out and getting caught in my stitches, so I'm gonna stop there with the stuffing and continue to sew. So I'm adjusting it in my hands, because before when I was clamping with my fingers, this was flat. Now it's stuffed, so it feels different. Starting to feel a little awkward, and that's quite all right. Also, I don't want to stretch the sock. I don't know if you can see that, stretching it versus letting it just relax. Let it just be there. I think this is a good point to go ahead and stuff the body and the head of the monkey. So while the center is open here, and I can take a nice bigger wad of the polyfill and push it all the way to the toe of the sock, and push it nice and full to the toe of the sock. This can be the head of my monkey. I don't want it to be not firm, you know, but there's a brain in there, right? So let's fill it up, and you massage it with your hands, feel around, feel that the new pieces that you're adding are joining the other pieces and becoming one. So I've stuffed it, and you'll notice that I'm working on a tabletop. Sometimes when people are sewing their monkey and they're working over their lap, the monkey is dangling in space, and then that's gonna stretch the sock and can cause the leg to twist. So you want to be sure that once you have the stuffing in here and the sock has weight, that you're letting the table support it. But I also want to find what's my right angle where my hands feel right again, so that I'm right-handed, so my left hand is supporting the sock that I'm stitching, and that way my right hand can pick up the needle again and sew some more. So again, I've been sewing so much that my yarn caught up to me. I've doubled the yarn through the needle so that I can work with a longer piece, but now it's getting caught in my work, and I want to be sure to pull that tail out of the way. So then I could set down my monkey, and I bring my hands over to the needle, and I'm gonna pull the needle down the yarn, so that makes that loose tail part shorter. So you'll see when I take my next stitch, it's not caught in the stitch. See, and it went right through, and I have more yarn available for stitching. Alright, so I'm stuffed to here. I have another couple of inches to stuff. I'm going to go ahead and pause and stuff it some more. And the trick is getting your clump of stuffing and then pushing it to where you want it to be, and really thinking about where that is. Otherwise, it might look like a snake that ate eggs and be lump, lump, lump. You want it to really have those pieces of stuffing join each other and become the smooth leg. And this is the tricky part, where we're going to be sewing across the center of the monkey, and this could be a stressful space for the monkey. But we want it to the sock to be able to be relaxed and not stretched, and you might want to put your stitches a little bit closer together at this point. And again, not stretching the monkey, but keeping it still sitting like relaxed. Relax, monkey. So I'm always checking, is it lined up? Do I have both layers in each stitch? If you stitch it and find later that there's a gap that needs a new stitch, you can always come back and add that later, no worries. So before I get too far down that next leg, I want to stop here and look back. So what I can feel is this leg is floppy. It needs a little stuffing right here. So I'm going to set down my needle and get a piece of stuffing. And I'm going in this second leg. And I'm going to get the wad of stuffing pushed in there. But now I'm going to guide it through across the center and over to the top of the thigh on the other side. And feel that that's joining nicely. So you want to be sure that you're happy with how you've stuffed the monkey to this point. It has enough in its head, feels nice and firm, because you're going to be sewing on this later. This is where the eyes are going to go, this is where the mouth is going to go. You want to be sure that it's stuffed enough to be able to sew into later. So everything feels pretty good. Now I want to reposition because I'm going to start sewing again. So again, I want to get my two layers lined up to each other without their curling. And oh, it gets caught on itself sometimes. Just want to be aware of that and let go of the struggle. Just depends on how you're holding it that the yarn might get tangled around itself. So again, if you notice, this the whole time has been the blanket stitch. So the yarn is coming away, and as I go through, I'm not going under it all. There's a loop here that's made that I'm going in the center of this loop and pulling, and that's what makes that blanket stitch. Another thing I want to point out right now, you'll see that as you're stitching, you're causing a spiral to happen that might cause your yarn to tangle like this. And what I recommend that you do then, if you hold your monkey up in the air and you just pet the yarn to let it relax and let it unspin so that you don't get all tangly and upset with your yarn. Sometimes we need to tell ourselves to relax, sometimes you need to tell your monkey or the yarn, relax. So depending on the kind of yarn you've selected, you may find that it sews smoothly, or you may have selected a yarn that has a bit of a tooth to it that then causes friction and it to catch on itself. So based on your various choices, you may find that it's easy or harder. So I noticed that my yarn, I've been using it up. So here again, my doubled yarn is coming out of the hole. I don't want to start stitching with doubled yarn. We're stitching with a single yarn. So I'm gonna lengthen out the yarn, drag my needle towards the end of the yarn a little bit more, and then keep going. Oh, but look how much I sewed. I'm gonna stuff it now. I thumbs can help to guide all that into that space and then push it up the leg. So see my hand's doing that squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. It helps the stuffing to align itself with what is already in there. And also, now that you're having a second leg, you want to compare the two. Is it stuffed the same amount? And does that matter? Did you want your monkey to be symmetrical? If you do, then you want to compare the legs as you're stuffing. Alright, so I'm stuffed back to the space. I don't want to crowd myself too much there, so I don't overstuff at those points. Don't forget to finish stuffing the second leg before you sew the toe shut. Important monkey lesson. And also comparing, they feel pretty similar. Alright, I definitely want that inside. I don't like the fuzzy little white stuff sticking out of my stitches. So, alright, I'm gonna flip it around so I can be right-handed again. Alright, here I am ready to do my last stitch. What I'm gonna do for my last stitch is definitely to make a loop that I go through, which I've been doing all along for the blanket stitch, but if you were doing the spiral stitch, you definitely want to make a loop stitch here that your yarn goes through and you pull it, yank, yank, that ties a little knot, and then what I'm going to do is go right in where that stitch, right next to where that stitch is, and I'm going to go into the middle of the monkey leg, and I'm going to come out of his shin. Yikes. It doesn't hurt him, it's okay. So I pulled the thread. If I pull it really tight, you could see it pucker and pull. So I'm gonna have it relax, but that's called burying the thread. That I went in with it while the needle was still attached. I went in and I come out further up the leg, and now when I go to trim it, be real careful. You don't wanna cut your monkey skin. So I'm gonna be real careful. And you can see it's got a freckle, but then when you squeeze it, boop, it's gone. So, and that is the first portion of the monkey. We have the head, the body, the backside, and 2 legs, and 2 feet. Now if I look at my remaining yarn, I like to use things where they are. So this yarn is on it, it's a smaller piece of yarn. Because I already cut out my ear, I could go ahead and pick up the earpiece and go ahead and do my stitches for the ear. So I'll open it up and I lay the yarn inside. I like to bury the tail to start and to finish. And I fold that, so remember it looked like kind of like a letter D. It's that monkey ear shape. And I'm pinching that in there when I make my first stitch. As you can see how that's closing, that makes a little bit of a knot. But that's also the way that I'm sewing the blanket stitch. And this is curling, it feels a little more difficult. So when that end shows up, whoop, just slide your needle down a little bit, and that gives you more yarn. So while I still have a little bit of an opening here, I'm going to stuff my ear. I don't overstuff the ears, I just put a little bit in, just to give them a little bit of volume. But you find that if you stuff it and then you look at it and pinch it and feel, oh, that's too much, you can always pull some out. but I'm happy with what I've put in, so I'll leave it. Alright, so the ear is just about ready to attach, but I am not ready to attach the ear. I like to put it on after the arms are done. So I just used the remainder of the yarn to go ahead and prepare the ear, and I can slide the needle off of that, and then that can just sit and wait for later. So we have the body done, we have one ear done, and I'm going to go ahead and start sewing the arms. So because we made a tail on this monkey, the arms are skinnier than the legs. So again, I'm going to only pull the yarn from the center of my skein. Then I take a length of yarn and always leave like a little bit tongue sticking out so somebody else, the next person, can find the yarn they need. And once again, threading that needle, I can support the yarn. If I try to thread it with a floppy like this, I'm not going to be able to do anything like that. So I'm going to support the yarn. I lay the eye of the needle right on top of that pinched piece of yarn. And then as I release the pinch, it pushes the yarn through the eye of the needle. It's miraculous and wonderful. And so I pull the yarn just to keep it out of the way. It stays doubled like that a little bit, but one tail is longer, and the longer one I'm going to go just like we started with the monkey feet. Now I'm going to start with the monkey hands, and I go ahead and I lay the tail of yarn inside the hand, fold it over, lining up the two edges to each other, and that first stitch I want to be sure that I'm going through the loop that I've made of the yarn, and so that it makes a little knot, and I go yank yank and it ties that knot. And here's the yarn feeding away, and as I go through, I'm aware of the loop that my yarn makes, and so as I pull my needle through there and it falls against the monkey hand, I'm making that blanket stitch again. So now it's sticking up this way, so I want to move it back so that I will get that loop space. So you'll notice that the cuff is a different thickness than the body of the sock, so I noticed that difference. It's like less layers, and it's more likely to curl. So you just want to, again, be attentive to your monkey, pay attention, see what it needs. You will not be happy if you forget about that second layer and you've sewn a whole bunch without the two layers together. That's the whole point of sewing along the edge here, is to get the two layers together. So it's starting to curl up. It's doing that little bit of I want to tangle thing, and I'm gonna hold my piece that I'm sewing up higher and let the yarn just dangle down, and just take a moment to breathe and let the yarn relax and unspin, so that maybe when you start sewing again it won't tangle as much. It might still want to tangle because there is a twist in the yarn. So I sewed the whole arm. I think it's a good idea to take one more stitch here that ties a knot. Specifically, I'm thinking, I want it to be a little bit tighter, so I'm going to just tie a knot here and do that little yank, yank, yank while I'm pinching it to support it. That ties a knot right there, so that I don't lose the opening as I stuffing inside. And remember, this is skinnier than the leg was, so I might need to take smaller bundles. So my thumb is doing most of that, and then just like putting on long socks onto yourself, you're pushing. See how that entire arm of the monkey is loaded on my thumb now, so that I could get that stuffing all the way down to the hand, and then it comes back off. So this is the first arm, so I'm establishing how thick do I want the arms to be? How stuffed full do I want them to be? How lumpy do I want them to be? I like my monkeys to have smoothness, so it's a lot of this massage, pinch, squeeze, just to get it for the stuffing to even out. Now, some people prefer to, at this point, stitch that shut and then attach it to the monkey. I prefer the open cylinder being attached. We're gonna stitch around this open circle when we attach it to the monkey. So I just bring the stuffing really just right to the end, trying to keep it inside, but really so that it feels nice and firm all the way in, all the way to the end there. So that arm is ready. So I'm gonna take my needle off. That arm's ready for surgery, and so is the ear. I'm gonna go ahead and do the other arm. When I go to sew the arms on the monkey, sometimes I like to go ahead and gently place where I think the monkey muzzle might go, so that I can then gauge their relationship to each other in space. Some people like to put the arms up higher. I like the proportion of putting it down a little bit lower. So then it definitely turns into a surgery moment. We want all the stuffing inside that cylinder, and as we place it on the side of the monkey, you look, get a good frontal look of, okay, that's where I want it. And for me today, maybe do I want the stitches going up? Do I want the stitches facing forward? I prefer the stitches facing down for this. So, but I made that choice consciously instead of just not even knowing about it. So go ahead and think about which way do you want your stitches facing. And then you want to position the monkey in such a way that you're ready for surgery. You then take the needle and thread are still attached to it. And remember, it's that open circle on the end. So I'm going to be stitching in the body and out the arm to attach it to the body. So my needle goes in the body, and then I turn the needle and it comes out of the back of the arm, and then I pull and I go in the body and pull down with my hand so that then that needle can come out of the arm. And every few stitches you'll need to reposition your monkey because you're traveling around a circle and you want it to be easy to get at. You don't want to be fighting it and trying to sew all awkwardly. It's already awkward enough, so let's try to keep it simple. In the body and out the arm. So depending on who gets the monkey at the end, if this is going to someone who will be flinging it around by the arms, you definitely want to give a couple extra stitches in the armpit and go through your stitch to tie a knot. So I'm going to do that one more time here. In the body, out the arm, and before my loop disappears, I'm going to go through that loop, and that ties a knot. And then again, supporting the work, giving a little tuggy yank to tie that knot. And now I'm going to bury the thread. Oh, but look, I have so much yarn that's left, and while it's securely attached to my monkey, I'm going to use this yarn to attach the mouth, the nose, the muzzle, whatever you would like to call it. I like that it lines up with the top of the arm. So here's the top of my arm, and I tend to line up the monkey muzzle about like that with it. So I'm not stretching this at all, I'm resting it right on the face of it, and I'm gonna start sewing along the top of it first. I may run out of yarn, but also sewing along the top, you tend to get the best stitches on the first part of it. So here my yarn was attached to the armpit, so I'm gonna have to go through the armpit, through the body of the monkey, and come out the corner of the mouth where I'm holding it, where I want it to be. So this compression of the monkey is slightly awkward. It may take a friend to help holding it. Whatever you need, you know, do what you need to get your monkey right. So I'm just folding this down a little just to help keep the volume, because we like it when the nose sticks out. So I just fold it out of my way. So here I am, the yarn is coming out of the muzzle, and now my stitch is gonna go again in the body and then out the mouth or muzzle. Always keep checking. Are you stretching the mouth? Some people stretch it and it goes everywhere. If that's the look you want, no judgment, you can do that if you like. But I want to stuff it and make it stick out. So right now I need it to be relaxed and not stretched. Make sure that you can see what you're doing and that you're sewing comfortably. So turning the monkey so that you can have access to seeing the stitches. And definitely by this point you may find that your yarn is getting a little tangly. Remember, you can lift your project and let the yarn dangle, and that dangle will relax the yarn and let it unspin. So here I might reposition, and just doing this keeps it a little bit out of the way. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself before I'm able to stuff it. You don't want to stitch it shut without stuffing it, so I can go ahead and put some stuffing there. And you know, it's to your preference, which you might not even know you have a preference yet if this is your first monkey that you're making. But you can always unstuff. If you push it in and you're like, oh, that's too much, you can always just pull out a little bit. No worries. But now that it is stuffed, I'm gonna have to hold it a little differently. I still want it to line up the way that it was before, but now it's a little bit stretched. So I'm gonna be pushing down on it to get the sock parts to line up the way they were before. And after stuffing the muzzle, it makes it a little more awkward, which can change your stitches, which is why I like to do the top first when it's not stressed, because they may lay nicely, and then then you're coming around to do the bottom when it might be awkward looking or weird, and that's okay. And it's just harder to see because it's under the mouth. So my yarn's getting short, and perhaps for yours you've run out of yarn already. We can always use the yarn from the second arm to finish sewing this. So we'll say that that's going to happen. I want to have enough yarn to be able to tie a knot and bury the thread. So even though I'm not quite done here, you can see that it's still open here, but I'm running out of yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and make one more stitch. And before that loop disappears, see, it's still there, I'm going to go through it so that I can tie a knot. And here's my knot action. I pinch, tug, tug, tug. And then I'm gonna bury my tail. And so what I do is I'm gonna make a stitch right next to where I am, and I'm gonna go out the back of the monkey. Sometimes I'll leave these hanging out, and sometimes I'll trim them. So then we go to do the second arm. So I'll be threading the needle back onto that piece. Line it up. Prepare for surgery. And once again, depending on if this is a soft sculpture you're making that will sit around and be admired, then you don't have to worry too much about reinforcing it. But if this is going to someone who is going to love it and play with it, then you definitely want to be sure you've got the extra knots made, maybe a couple of knots, reinforcing definitely the armpit. They get carried around by their arms, whether you are a child or a grown-up. You want to reinforce the armpit of the monkey. And then, don't forget, I still have that little bit here left to stitch. So here I am from the armpit, and I'm going to go into the body, and then I'm going to travel through the center of the monkey and come out over where I had tied my knot at the bottom of the mouth. And again, you can see if I pull really tight, it changes the arm. So I want that to be able to relax and have my stitch be a relaxed stitch from there. So I'm pushing the muzzle down to support it as I finish the stitches on the muzzle. So last stitch I take, I'm going to be sure to get that little tail out of the way, right? Go through the loop before it disappears. And try to pull that tight. And then bury my tail. So I'll go in right next to where I am. You don't want to step away and make a big long stitch that wasn't necessary. You want to put, while you have the needle on it, go right next to where you were and come out some other place. You don't want to leave it like that. You want to pull it so that it's really in there. And then whenever you're trimming this, make sure you don't cut your sock. Well, it can't hear me yet, so I'm going to go ahead and work on the ears. Their placement and location for a monkey tends to be, I tend to line it up with the top of the muzzle as the bottom of the ear. It's a good rule to line it up. So remember, it's okay if the surgery feels awkward. Line up the bottom of the ear with the top of the muzzle, and it kind of runs to the toe part of that, or the head, the head of the sock. And that's what I've selected. And I'm gonna stitch with the ear leaning forward and put my stitches because I'd like the ear to kind of go forward so he could really listen to me. I like it when they listen. So I'm stitching, doing the whip stitch, that spiral stitch up the back of the ear, into the back of the head and out the ear. And that's the folded edge of the ear is what I'm sewing now. So I'm making nice tight stitches, which is really pulling the stitches in, but it's also going to keep that ear in place. And as always, your last stitch, you want to go through the loop before it disappears. Tug, tug. And then bury the tail. And then when I stopped, that looks weird. Now, because I stitched the back of the ear, it's leaning forward. And if you notice, you don't have to just take it as that. You can manipulate it a little bit and scooch it. So now it's sticking out like the monkey ear sticks out. So we have that one more ear to do. So I don't need as much yarn, but I can always take more than I need, so that better to have scraps of yarn than to not have enough and have to restart again. Something I noticed here before I go to stitch it is that edge bothers me a little. I'm just trimming it to round it out a little. So pause for a moment, feel a sense of accomplishment, and then we see, we still have the tail to do, because this monkey is going to have a tail. Take another length, kind of that longer length again of yarn, always from the center, always leave some so you can find it again. Pinch the end, lay the eye of the needle on it, press down with the needle, and release the pinch, and the yarn goes through. I double it just to keep it feeling shorter, but that longer one is the one that I'm going to lay inside to start. Now, I'm going to recommend to you that you stuff as you go on the tail. The tail is very skinny, and it will be very awkward to try to stuff it later, and you can wind up distorting your stitches and distorting the fibers within the tail. So every few inches, I'm going to ask that you please stuff the tail every few inches so that you can keep it under control and not be distorting it. So after all that sculpture and everything, it feels simple again to line up the two edges of the fabric and be making these stitches. Because now this is a skinnier cylinder that you're making here with the tail. It's the skinniest of all the ones that you've done. So you might, before I was stuffing with my thumb, but now I'm switching to stuffing with my pinky finger, because that's what works. You want your stuffing to get all the way to the end. After you've stitched this whole thing is not the time to be trying to put stuffing in the end. Now's the time, when you're close enough that your finger will reach. So again, as you see me bracing it in my hands, I'm trying to just hold the work flat, not so much pulling as just holding it together there. You'll find that if you are pulling it apart, you'll be loading lots more stitches, and then as you release it, it may ruffle. And if that's something that you like to have happen, then by all means, it's your monkey, so enjoy it. But if you don't want the stitches to ruffle, then you want to hold the sock without stretching it. So, attaching your tail to your monkey. I had a friend once that attached the monkey tail way up high. It was pretty interesting. You want to pay attention to where you're attaching I would say above the rear end where tails would go is a good spot to attach your monkey tail. It's surgery similar to the arms. Looks like I don't quite have enough stuffing to the end. When I cut it out, it's skinnier at this end, so it's a little harder to stuff because I wasn't, it's not parallel the whole way. It's starting to taper. And because of this awkwardness, I tend to not do tails on my monkeys anymore. I like the arms to be bigger so that they can hug. So I think hugging is so important in life and in monkey making. So I like the monkeys to have big arms, and I like them to sit comfortably, and I don't know, I'm okay with not having tails usually. But I wanted to show you how to do it so that you can make that choice yourself if you want to have a tail or not on your monkey. So this one will have the tail. I think I like the stitches facing up, but again, turn it, make that choice. The stitches are facing down, the stitches are facing the side, the stitches are facing up. Okay, I'm gonna turn them that way just because that's what seems right to me. Can't always explain why you make a choice that you do, but know that you're making a choice and not that it's just happening. But decide which way. Okay, this way. And because of the tail possibly being a stress point, I am going to tie a knot with my first stitch. And maybe every other stitch too, because I have seen monkeys be flung around in circles by their tail. And it's a stuffed animal, but you want to make sure the tail stays on. So reinforce with knots is a good idea. And then, as always, you don't want to just cut it here and have it possibly come undone. You want to bury it. And by burying it, you are taking the very, very close spot where you can make a stitch. And then let's come out the front. So we go through the body. Oh, look. Does he want a belly button? You could make a little stitch here that then goes back to the other side if you wanted to add a belly button. But I'm not gonna do that. So, boop. All right. Ta-da, monkey, so far. So we just have to make decisions about the eyes, and then it's almost done. All right, so here we are, ready to make decisions about the eyes. And I selected possibly green eyes or orange eyes. Sometimes it's fun to just do one eye on a monkey, and this might be that moment. Let's see, I don't know. And let's see if it is more about two eyes. Possibility. Here we have two different eyes from each other, which sometimes is fun to give it a little different look. That could be cute. I've selected these two eyes to put on for this monkey. I've selected embroidery floss. So to pull a length out, I'm going to hold on to the end that's sticking out, and I also pinch the other end of this and pull a length, another length, and one more length. It's always just easier to have more room to work with than less. And when you cut it, respect the next person by always leaving a little bit showing. Now, when I showed you the materials when we first started, and I had mentioned regular needle and thread, this thread I had was white, so I wanted to use the blue embroidery floss so that it will show up in contrast on the buttons, because I don't have white anywhere else in the monkey. I like to be coordinated when I can. So it would be hard to thread embroidery floss onto the tiny sewing needle. So I found a needle that's in between the two. Here's the tapestry needle I've been using for the whole video, and you can see this one is shorter, and the reason I tested it was to go through the buttonholes. So it will go through the buttonholes. So I'm gonna go ahead and thread this needle. And I thread it by pinching the end of the floss and laying the needle, the eye of the needle on top, and it threads. Starting my thread, I want to anchor it somewhere near where I'm going to be coming out for the eyes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie a knot on the ear. So I want you to watch closely as I do this. I'm going to go in up here where I can see some of that thread, and I'm going to come out right in the seam of the ear, where the ear is attached to the head is where I'm coming out. And I'm going to pull it until I have just a little bit of thread still showing right here, that floss. And then I'm going to take a little baby stitch right where I came out here, and it's just a tiny stitch, and I'm going to go through that loop before it disappears, and that ties a knot, and then I can pinch so that goes away. And I've just anchored that floss, so now it's attached to my monkey. So then now I will turn it over, and I hold the eyes and think about it. Where do I want them to go? Sometimes it's nice when they're closer down, further up. Depends on the size of your buttons, how and why you're making different choices here. I think that's a good spot. So I set the second one aside, and I'm just going to hold that one. And then what I need to do is travel from where I was. So I'm going to little mini stitch right next to where I was and come out through the hole in the button. And also the holes in the buttons are at certain angles. So if you only have 2 holes in your button, do you want your pupil to be straight up and down, or slanted, or side to side? So just be aware that that's a choice you're making. Here I have 4 holes, so it's going to be like that plus sign, depending on the angle that I wind up letting the button sit. So what I do is I come out of the sock, and then I tilt the button out of the way. Like I tilt the button so that I can just go through the button. I think it's really hard when you make a stitch if you're trying to like come back out of the buttonhole. So if I go through, now I'm making the stitch down to the 4th hole here. I'm going into the monkey head with my needle, and I'm going to tilt it to the side, and I'm going to let the needle come out underneath the button and pull that thread and tighten it a little bit, and then I'm going to have the needle come through the buttonhole. And I stitch across, and then I'm going to come out of the sock, but I'm not going to, I mean, you can't crank it and come back through a buttonhole. So just take your time. Make sure you do enough stitches to really anchor it really well. And a lot of people think, oh, I make a cute sock monkey and I'll give it to a little baby. But that could be dangerous with how you sew on buttons. So if you are planning to make a sock monkey as a gift for someone with a new infant, it may be a better choice to do a satin embroidery satin stitch of the eyes instead of buttons at all, just because you don't want that choking hazard. So something to keep in mind. All right, so then I place the next one. So that feels awkward, but you gotta sometimes push into the monkey in an awkward kind of way to do surgery. And then I want symmetry, so I'm looking to see that the holes in the button are turned the same way on the second button. And don't get frustrated if your yarn goes around the button. It happens. Just undo it. But with each stitch you make, and as I turn it, it loosens the stitches that I already made. So I have to encourage them to stay together. Or try not to turn the button too much so that it does that loosening. So what I'm doing is making stitches repeatedly, building up the layers of floss. Until it just seems that it is secure. For all the work you put into your monkey, you don't want to shortchange yourself now by not doing enough stitches in the eyes. So I think I did enough stitches, and I like anchoring it back to the ear just for safekeeping instead of like having weird knots underneath the eyes. So I travel to the seam of the ear. And make a little baby stitch again. And right before the loop disappears of that baby stitch, I go through the loop, do that tug tug to tie the knot, and then I make another little baby stitch and send the thread through the monkey and snip. And I think he needs a mouth. Sometimes you'll find that the seam, if you use the toe of the sock, it gives you a little bigger muzzle, and sometimes the seam that is on the toe will be enough of a smile, but in this case it just looks silent. And even though his mouth will be shut, I would think I would like for him to have that mouth line. So I need to attach it again. So I go in by the edge, but I'm going to leave that tail hanging out right there. And I'll just take my tie my knot right on the surface of the mouth. And then I'm going to be drawing a line across by taking stitches. So I just made one stitch here and that draws that line, and then I came out ahead. So now I'm going to go back to meet it and come forward. And I'm not pulling too tight. I'm just going to let them lay together gently. Here's the monkey, friends, complete and full of fun and love, and I hope you have a wonderful time making your monkey.